My name is Samuel Vance. I am 68 years old, and I am the guardian of a promise I made to my late wife Isabel. For 40 years, I have poured my life into our family vineyard, a piece of land that holds more memories than grapes. I thought my daughter Clara understood that. But her husband Marcus only saw dollar signs where I saw my soul. At their wedding in front of 200 guests, Marcus toasted to the future. Then he demanded I hand over the keys to my farm as a gift. When I refused, he slapped me. The sound of his hand hitting my face was the only thing you could hear in that suddenly silent room. I didn't raise my voice. I simply straightened my jacket, looked at my daughter's shocked face, and walked out. That night I didn't call the police. I opened a locked oak box my wife had left me. Inside there was a key, a USB drive, and a private phone number. I made the call she told me to make if the worst ever happened. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you are watching from in the comments below. And please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect something precious from greed. Marcus thought he was dealing with a simple old farmer. He believed my hands stained with soil and work were a sign of weakness. But to understand the power Isabel left me, you need to understand the quiet war that began the night before the wedding. It started at the rehearsal dinner. The restaurant sat on the edge of Seneca Lake, a jewel box of warm lights and gleaming silverware. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. My daughter Clara glowed her eyes full of love for the man beside her. But I saw him for what he was. Marcus Thorne wasn't a son-in-law, he was a salesman. And he was trying to sell me a future that required bulldozing my past. My past. Isabel's past. He dominated the conversation, his voice as smooth as the expensive wine he kept pouring. He spoke of asset diversification and market trends, words that felt alien in the clean air of the Finger Lakes. Then he turned his attention to me, his smile wide but his eyes narrow. "Sam, you know." He began leaning forward conspiratorially. "With this lakefront access, Isabel's vineyard has the potential to be a $10 million resort. We're talking a real legacy." The other guests at the table murmured in appreciation. They heard the word legacy and thought of something lasting. I heard it and knew he meant something disposable. While he spoke of infinity pools and spa services, my mind went back to the day Isabel and I had planted the first row of vines, our hands deep in the dark, rich soil. That was a legacy. I just smiled, a quiet, simple thing. Its value isn't measured in dollars, Marcus. Clara, ever the peacemaker, placed a hand on his arm. "Honey, let's just enjoy tonight." She was a good daughter, but she was blinded by the shine of his ambition. She saw a successful man who could give her the world. I saw a man who would take the world from anyone to get what he wanted. He wanted my farm. He'd been hinting at it for months, calling it an underperforming asset. To him, the rows of vines my wife and I had nurtured through drought and frost were just lines on a property map. The soil where I'd buried our old dog Buster and where I still spoke to Isabel on quiet nights was just dirt. The meal ended with smiles and promises, but the taste of his words was bitter. I couldn't sleep that night. The restaurant air felt stale and recycled, so I walked out into the one place that always felt true. The vineyard. The moon was a silver coin in the black sky, and under its light, the vines stood in silent rows like soldiers guarding a long-held promise. The air smelled of earth and water, and the faint sweet perfume of the late-season grapes. This was a language Marcus would never understand. I walked to the oldest vine, a thick, gnarled thing near the edge of the property, and ran my hand over the weathered support post. 30 years ago, Isabel and I had carved our initials into it right here. I could still remember the feel of her hand in mine, her laugh, as she struggled with the old knife. I could almost feel her presence beside me, a comforting warmth against the cool night air. "This land is our soul, Sam," she'd told me just a few years before she got sick. Her voice was as clear in my memory as the stars above. "It'll take care of our family, but only if we take care of it. Don't ever let anyone turn it into just a number on a balance sheet." I stood there for a long time, the cool night air filling my lungs. It was then I thought of the simple oak box she'd left me tucked away in my safe. Plain oak, no varnish, just the smooth feel of honest wood. Only open it when you truly have to, she had instructed, her eyes serious. When a man shows you his true nature, believe him the first time. I had a feeling that day was getting closer. I made my promise to her again, a whisper to the vines and the stars. I would not let her down. Sleep eventually came, but it was thin and restless. The morning of the wedding arrived with a brilliant cloudless sky that felt like a lie. I was in my room at the inn, struggling with the unfamiliar knot of a bow tie, when a sharp rap came at the door. It was Marcus. He was already dressed in his tuxedo, looking like a magazine cover. He wasn't carrying a gift. He was carrying a weapon disguised as a portfolio. He closed the door behind him and placed the leather-bound folder on my dresser. "I have a wedding gift for Clara and me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "And you're the only one who can give it to us." He opened it. Inside was a professionally designed proposal, complete with architectural renderings. The title read, "The Thorne Estates and Winery at Seneca Lake." It was a plan to tear down our modest farmhouse, build a glass and steel monstrosity of a hotel, and commercialize every inch of the land. My land. The images showed stylish, anonymous people laughing by a poolside bar where my vegetable garden now stood. They showed a parking lot where Isabel's favorite oak tree had shaded us for decades. "It's a simple transfer of asset management," he said, sliding a pen and a signature page towards me. "We'll create an LLC. Legally, it's the smartest move. It'll protect you from inheritance taxes and maximize profits for the family." For Clara. He always used Clara's name when he wanted something. He used it like a shield and a key. I didn't even look at the papers. I just looked at him, at the raw, undisguised greed in his eyes. He saw my silence as hesitation, as an opening. "Look, Sam, it's time to be realistic. You're not getting any younger. This farm is too much for you. This is how you secure your daughter's future. It's what she deserves." I pushed the portfolio gently back towards him. My hands, the hands he thought were only good for farming, were steady. My voice was quiet, but it filled the small room. "My answer is still no, Marcus." He didn't expect that. Not then. He thought he had me cornered. For a moment the charming mask slipped and I saw a flash of the ugly thing beneath it. But he recovered quickly. He just smiled, a thin, predatory curve of his lips. "We'll talk after the ceremony," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "After you've had time to think about your daughter's future." He walked out, leaving the threat hanging in the air between us. I knew then that the wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a battlefield, and Marcus had just declared war. The wedding reception was everything Marcus had promised Clara it would be. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting a warm golden light over 200 guests. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. A small orchestra played in the corner, a soft melody that was meant to sound like effortless joy. My daughter was radiant. She moved through the room with a lightness I hadn't seen in her since she was a little girl, her laughter mixing with the music. Every time she looked at Marcus, her face was a perfect picture of love. And every time I saw it, a piece of my heart ached, because I knew the man she loved was an illusion. For me, the whole room felt like a stage. The smiles were rehearsed, the conversations were scripted, and I was the unwilling actor in a play I hadn't read. I sat at my table, nursing a glass of water, feeling the weight of the morning's confrontation. Marcus avoided my eyes, but I could feel his presence, a predator circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to focus on Clara, on her happiness, telling myself that maybe I was wrong. Maybe a man could change. But I knew better. A man might change his suit, but he rarely changes his soul. Then it came. The gentle clinking of a fork against a champagne flute. A hush fell over the crowd. Marcus stood up, taking the microphone. He looked every bit the charming, successful husband. He was handsome, confident, and when he smiled, the whole room seemed to smile with him. "I just want to say a few words," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. He spoke beautifully about Clara, calling her his light, his future, the best part of himself. The guests sighed contentedly. Clara dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was it. The next move in his game. After he had praised his new bride sufficiently, he turned his gaze across the room directly at me. "And I want to thank my incredible father-in-law, Sam," he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity. The spotlight found me, pinning me to my chair. A man who knows the value of hard work. A man who built a legacy from the ground up with his own two hands. He used the word legacy like he owned it, like it was a trinket he could pick up and admire. And tonight, he continued, his voice rising with theatrical emotion. Tonight, he is going to ensure the future of that legacy. He paused, letting the suspense build. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. To show his faith in the next generation as his ultimate wedding gift to his only daughter, tonight, Sam is going to give us the keys to Isabel's vineyard so that we may guide it into a new, prosperous future. The words hit me like a physical blow. The room erupted in applause. They thought it was a beautiful, generous gesture, a father passing the torch. They didn't see the gun he was holding to my head. I looked at Clara. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated joy, tears streaming down her cheeks as she beamed at me, then at her new husband. In that moment, she believed it. She believed in this beautiful lie, this generous story he had created. And that was the most painful part of all. She had no idea she was applauding my execution. I remained seated, a statue in a sea of celebration. The applause eventually died down, replaced by a low murmur of conversation as the orchestra started up again. But the play wasn't over. Marcus handed the microphone to the best man and started moving through the tables. He walked with a purpose, a confident stride that brought him directly to me. A photographer, sensing a moment, followed a few steps behind him. Marcus leaned down, his face close to mine. The charming smile was still plastered on his face for the benefit of the surrounding guests, but his eyes were cold and hard as stone. "The keys, Sam," he whispered the words, a low hiss under the music. "Now, let's not ruin her perfect day." I looked past him at my daughter, who was watching us, her expression a little confused, but still trusting. I looked back at the man she had married. "I told you this morning, Marcus," I said, my voice barely audible. "No." The smile on his face twitched. For a second, just a second, I saw the mask slip. "Don't be a sentimental old fool," he breathed, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a chair. "This is happening. Give them to me." "No," I repeated. It was the only word I had left. His face contorted. "Listen to me, you old man," he hissed, his voice venomous. "I am the man of this family now. Her family. You will do as I say. You will give me the keys." I simply shook my head, a small, final gesture of defiance. And then it happened. His hand was a blur. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The music screeched to a halt. 200 conversations stopped mid-sentence. His hand had struck my cheek hard. The force of it jolted my head back, and for a second the glittering chandeliers seemed to tilt and sway. A sharp metallic taste filled my mouth. In the deafening silence that followed, there was a single brutal sound. The flash of the photographer's camera capturing my moment of ultimate humiliation for eternity. I could hear Clara cry out my name, a sound of pure shock and horror. "Marcus, what did you do?" I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. My cheek was burning, a dull throb that seemed to radiate through my entire body. But I didn't touch it. I didn't look at Marcus. I looked only at my daughter, at her horrified, tear-streaked face. I saw the illusion shattering in her eyes. I held her gaze for a long moment, pouring all the love and all the sorrow I felt into that one look. Then, without a word, I straightened my jacket. I turned my back on my son-in-law, on the shocked faces of the guests, on the wreckage of my daughter's perfect day. I walked. I didn't run. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace through the silent crowd, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor. I walked past the beautiful flowers and the half-eaten cake. I walked towards the grand double doors, and I didn't look back. I pushed them open and stepped out into the cool, dark night, leaving the golden cage of their celebration behind me. The applause eventually died down, replaced by a low murmur of conversation as the orchestra hesitantly started up again. But the play wasn't over. I watched as Marcus handed the microphone to the best man and started moving through the tables. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a predator that knows its prey is trapped. He smiled and nodded at guests as he passed, accepting their congratulations. A photographer, sensing a poignant father-son-in-law moment, followed a few steps behind him, camera at the ready. He arrived at my table, and the polite smiles from our table guests faded into awkward silence. He leaned down, placing his hands on the back of the empty chair beside me. The charming smile was still plastered on his face for the benefit of anyone watching, but up close his eyes were cold and hard as stone. "The keys, Sam," he whispered the words, a low hiss under the music. His breath smelled of expensive champagne and something sour. "Now, let's not ruin her perfect day." The photographer raised his camera, waiting to capture the symbolic handover. I looked past him at my daughter, who was watching us from the head table, her expression a little confused, but still trusting. I looked back at the man she had married, this hollow man in a fine suit. "I told you this morning, Marcus," I said, my voice barely audible, meant for him alone. "No." The smile on his face twitched. For a second, just a second, I saw the mask slip, revealing the raw fury beneath. "Don't be a sentimental old fool," he breathed, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of the chair. "This is happening. Everyone is watching. Give them to me too." "No," I repeated. It was the only word I had left. It was the only word that mattered. His face contorted. The smile was gone completely, now replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. He leaned in closer, so close I could feel the heat coming off him. "Listen to me, you old man," he hissed, his voice venomous. "I am the man of this family now, her family. You are a guest here. You will do as I say. You will give me the keys." I simply shook my head, a small final gesture of defiance. It was a refusal, not just to his demand, but to his entire world. And then it happened. His hand was a blur. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The music screeched to a halt, as if the conductor's arm had been seized. 200 conversations stopped mid-sentence. His open palm had struck my cheek hard. The force of it jolted my head back, and for a second the glittering chandeliers seemed to tilt and sway. A sharp metallic taste filled my mouth. A dull, burning throb began to bloom across the side of my face. In the deafening silence that followed, a silence so total it felt like a physical weight, there was a single brutal sound. The pop and flash of the photographer's camera capturing my moment of ultimate humiliation for eternity. The frozen tableau was broken by a scream. It was Clara. "Marcus, what did you do?" Her voice was a shard of glass cutting through the stillness. I slowly, deliberately pushed my chair back from the table. The legs scraped against the polished floor, a sound that seemed impossibly loud. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, a mixture of pity, shock, and morbid curiosity. I did not touch my cheek. I did not look at Marcus, who stood there breathing heavily, his chest puffed out like some kind of animal that had just asserted its dominance. I stood up. I was a bit unsteady, but I stood up tall. I felt a trickle of warmth at the corner of my mouth. I ignored it. With a steadiness that came from some deep, untouched reserve of strength, I straightened my suit jacket, pulling it taut. It was a simple gesture, an act of putting myself back together. Then I looked at my daughter. Her hand was over her mouth, her beautiful face a canvas of horror and disbelief. The illusion was shattered. In her eyes I saw the man she thought she had married vanish, replaced by the monster who had just struck her father. I held her gaze for a long moment, pouring all the love and all the sorrow I felt into that one look. Then without a word I turned my back on my son-in-law, on the shocked faces of the guests, on the wreckage of my daughter's perfect day. I walked. I didn't run. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace through the silent crowd, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The path they made for me felt a mile long. I walked past the beautiful flowers and the half-eaten cake. I walked towards the grand double doors, and I didn't look back. I pushed them open and stepped out into the cool, dark night, leaving the golden cage of their celebration behind me. The drive home was a blur of dark roads and familiar turns. My cheek throbbed with a dull, insistent rhythm, a physical reminder of the humiliation. Each pulse was an echo of the crack that had silenced a room full of people. But my hands on the steering wheel were steady. The shock had burned away, leaving something cold and heavy in its place. Purpose. Anger, I learned in that long, quiet drive, wasn't just a hot flash of rage. It could be cold. It could be patient. It could be fuel. I didn't park in front of the house. The porch light was on just as I always left it, and for a painful moment, I could imagine Isabel waiting up for me ready with a warm cup of tea and a quiet question. That was a memory I couldn't face tonight. The house was a place of family, of love, and now of a deep and profound betrayal. It felt contaminated. Instead, I drove around back, the crunch of the gravel under my tires, the only sound in the sleeping world. I parked next to the winery. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth, aging barrels, and the faint, sweet promise of wine. This was my space, a place of work, a place of reason. There were no ghosts of laughter in here, only the quiet, dignified process of turning fruit and time into something of value. I walked past the large stainless steel vats and the silent bottling line to the small, cluttered office in the back. It wasn't much, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out over the first row of vines, now just dark shapes against a sky full of stars. I sat down in my worn leather chair, the familiar creak a small comfort in the vast silence. I didn't turn on the main light, just the small green banker's lamp on my desk. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the hum of the cooling units, letting the cold resolve settle deep into my bones. Then I picked up the phone. My fingers knew the number by heart. The phone rang twice before he picked up. David. He answered, his voice thick with sleep. David Chen had been my lawyer for 30 years and my friend for 40. He'd helped me draw up the first contracts for the farm, and he'd held my hand at Isabel's funeral. David. It's Sam. My own voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. It was flat empty of the storm that was raging inside me. There was a pause, then the rustle of sheets. Sam, it's past midnight. What's wrong? Is it? Clara's fine, I said. But he did it, David. At the reception. In front of everyone. I explained it all. I kept my voice even, reporting the facts as if I were describing a problem with the irrigation system or a late-season frost. The speech, the public demand for the keys, my refusal, the slap. As I spoke, I could picture David on the other end, sitting up in bed, running a hand through his graying hair, his sharp, intelligent mind already piecing it all together. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was no longer sleepy. It was wide awake. Okay, Sam. Listen to me very carefully. Don't call Clara. Don't call anyone else. Don't answer the door if they show up. Just lock up, sit tight, and wait. I'll be there first thing in the morning, around 7. Okay, David, I said. And Sam, He added, his voice firm. Open the box. It's time. He didn't have to ask which box. We had spoken about it 6 months ago after Marcus had first tried to advise me on my finances, presenting me with a complicated plan that essentially signed control of the farm over to him. I had refused then too, but the attempt had been a warning shot. That was when I had first told David about Isabel's final gift. David had called it Isabel's insurance policy. He was right. Isabel had always seen people for who they truly were, long before I did. She had seen the rot in Marcus from the very beginning. I hung up the phone and sat there in the quiet dark of my office. The rage was still there, a low fire burning deep inside. But now it had somewhere to go. It had a purpose. I stood up and walked over to the old iron safe behind my desk, the one that held 40 years of deeds records and the entire history of our life's work. My hands didn't shake as I spun the dial to the combination Isabel and I had chosen on our 10th anniversary. The heavy door swung open with a low groan, revealing the neat stacks of files inside. And there, sitting on top of a stack of property deeds, was a plain oak box. No varnish, no lock, just the smooth feel of honest wood. The work of my own hands, from a piece of oak that had fallen in a storm long ago. I lifted it out and placed it in the small pool of light on my desk. The war had begun, and this was my armory. I sat for a moment in the quiet dark of my office, the air thick with the ghosts of the past and the cold reality of the present. Then I reached into the safe and lifted out the oak box. It wasn't a jewelry box, ornate and delicate. It was a workbox, sturdy and true, joined at the corners with the same dovetails I had taught myself to make when I was a young man. I had made it for her to keep her gardening seeds in. She had kept other things instead. I placed it in the small pool of light on my desk. The wood was warm and familiar under my fingertips. For a moment I hesitated. I thought of what might be inside. A final letter. A faded photograph from our youth. A part of me wanted the comfort of sentiment, a memory to hold on to in the storm. But I knew Isabel better than that. She was practical. She was a fighter, and she had left me an arsenal. I lifted the lid. There was no scent of dried flowers or old paper. The first thing I saw was a small black leather ledger. It was the kind you could buy at any office supply store, simple and anonymous. I opened it. The pages were filled with Isabel's elegant, precise handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was a record. My breath caught in my throat. Each entry was dated and noted with a purpose. $5,000, June 12, 2022, the first one read, for a down payment on their apartment. I remembered that day. Marcus had come to us full of apologies, saying the bank had delayed his bonus. It was for Clara, of course. It was always for Clara. I turned the page. $10,000, April 5, 2023, for urgent car repairs. Another memory, another story of bad luck from Marcus. Page after page, the same story repeated itself. $3,000 for a dental emergency. $7,000 to cover a miscalculated tax bill. A dozen smaller amounts for things he swore he'd pay back at the end of the month. He never had. It was a meticulous chronicle of his lies and our generosity. I did the math in my head as I flipped through the pages, but I didn't have to. On the final page, Isabel had done it for me. The final tally at the bottom was circled twice in red ink. $75,000. A debt of gratitude he had repaid with a slap. Beneath the ledger was a simple silver thumb drive. It felt cold and impersonal. My old office laptop whirred to life, its screen cutting a blue rectangle into the darkness. I pushed the drive into the USB port. A single folder appeared on the screen labeled simply MT Financials. It wasn't photos. It was spreadsheets, bank statements, credit card bills. It was a mountain of debt that made the $75,000 he owed us look like pocket change. a string of failed high-risk investments, maxed-out lines of credit. It was a picture of pure, frantic desperation. I wondered how she had gotten it, and then I saw a small folded note at the bottom of the ledger. I opened it. Her handwriting again. All loans subject to financial review. She had made him sign for every dollar, and in doing so, she had earned the right to see the truth he was hiding. She knew she had known all along. Next, I pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with a drop of dark red wax, the kind she used for her Christmas cards. It felt heavy, official. Typed neatly on the front were the words, Partnership Agreement and First Right of Refusal, Tanaka Holdings. The name hit me like a ghost from the past. Tanaka Holdings. Mr. Tanaka. A man I had helped get his start more than 20 years ago, when he was just an ambitious young entrepreneur, and I was just a farmer with a bit of land to offer as collateral for a friend. We had lost touch over the years as his empire grew, but I never forgot his quiet integrity. What did he have to do with this? Isabel had never mentioned his name. I set the envelope aside, my mind racing. At the very bottom of the box, nestled in a bed of felt, was the last item. It was a tiny digital voice recorder no bigger than my thumb. It looked insignificant, easy to overlook. I pressed the small play button. A faint hiss, and then a voice. It was Marcus. His voice was slick with a false sincerity I now knew all too well. Isabel, please be reasonable, he was saying. Think of it as unlocking the value of your assets. Sam is a great farmer, but he's too sentimental to see the big picture. Then I heard my wife's voice. It was weaker than I remembered, strained by her illness, but it was still steel. Marcus, the big picture is the one you see from the front porch, not the one on a banker's spreadsheet. The farm is not an asset. It is our home. The answer is no. And I would ask you not to bring this up again behind my husband's back. The recording ended. I clicked it off. I leaned back in my chair, the 4 items laid out before me in the lamplight. A ledger of his debts. A drive detailing his desperation. A mysterious agreement with a powerful old friend. And a recording of his treachery. This wasn't a box of memories. This was a box of evidence. A box of ammunition. Isabel hadn't just been tending her garden in her final years. She had been sharpening a sword. She had been fighting a war I didn't even know was being waged, protecting me, protecting our legacy, even as she was leaving it. The grief I felt was immense, but for the first time since the wedding, it was mixed with something else. A cold, clear sense of direction. I now knew what I had to do. I was not just a farmer. I was the executor of my wife's final will. I didn't have to wait long. Just as the first rays of sun crested the hills and painted the morning mist gold, I saw the headlights of David Chen's car coming up the long gravel driveway. I watched him get out a briefcase in one hand, a thermos of what I knew was coffee in the other. He was a man of habit, of steady, reliable rituals. He was exactly who I needed. He came into the office without knocking, his eyes immediately finding the dark, ugly bruise on my cheek. He didn't say, "I told you so," or ask if I was okay. He was past that. He just looked at me with a deep, sorrowful anger in his eyes, an anger on my behalf. Then his gaze fell to the desk, to the items I had laid out in the lamplight, like pieces of a puzzle. So he said, his voice a low rumble, "This is Isabel's last will and testament." He poured me a cup of coffee without asking, and we sat there for a moment. 2 old friends in the quiet of a new morning, preparing for war. He examined each item with the meticulous care of a surgeon. He read through the ledger first, his lips a thin, tight line. $75,000, he murmured, shaking his head. This establishes a clear pattern of financial dependency and manipulation. It's ugly, but it's not illegal. Next, he slid the USB drive into his own sleek laptop. As he scrolled through the files, his expression hardened. But this is different. The screen showed a web of debt, of failed stock market gambles, of loans taken against assets Marcus didn't even have. This is motive, pure and simple. He wasn't just trying to get the farm, Sam. He needed it. He's leveraged up to his eyeballs. Without an asset like this to secure his loans, his whole house of cards comes down. He looked at the note Isabel had left about financial review. She was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Then he picked up the small voice recorder. He held it to his ear, and I pressed play. We listened together to Marcus's slick, condescending tone and to Isabel's voice, weak in body but unbreakable in spirit, as she shut him down. When it was over, David just closed his eyes for a moment. "Character," he whispered. "This speaks to his character, his intent to deceive." Finally, he turned to the last item. The thick manila envelope, its wax seal still intact. "And what is this?" he asked. "I was waiting for you," I said. He took a small knife from his briefcase and slit the envelope open with a surgeon's precision. He pulled out a thick document bound in a blue legal cover. He began to read, his eyes scanning the pages quickly at first, then more slowly. I watched his face. I saw his eyebrows raise, a look of disbelief which slowly transformed into a look of profound, unadulterated admiration. He let out a low whistle, a sound I hadn't heard him make in years. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "My God, Sam," he said, his voice full of awe. "Isabel was a flat-out genius." He tapped the document. "I need you to listen very carefully, because what your wife did here, it's one of the most brilliant pieces of legal chess I have ever seen." He took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "About 5 years ago," he began, "Isabel got wind that a major investment group, Tanaka Holdings, was quietly buying up land in the region. Their plan wasn't condos or a strip mall. They wanted to create a massive agricultural preserve, a sort of high-end ecotourism destination built around sustainable local farms. Most people sold. It was good money. But Isabel, she didn't want to sell. She wanted a partnership." He turned the document around so I could see the signature page. There it was. Isabel's signature, clear and strong, and beside it, the signature of Kenji Tanaka. "She negotiated a deal," David continued, his voice electric with the discovery. "This agreement states that Isabel's vineyard is the designated centerpiece of the entire Tanaka Greenbelt project. But that's not the genius part. This is..." He pointed to a specific clause, his finger tracing the dense legal text. "This is a first right of refusal clause with a poison pill. It means that Tanaka Holdings has the exclusive legally binding first right to purchase this farm at a pre-agreed, and I mean very generous price under one of two conditions. One, if you decide to sell it. Or two." He paused for effect, looking me right in the eye. "If ownership is ever transferred, gifted, or otherwise conveyed to any individual not bearing the Vance name without the express written consent of the Tanaka Holdings Board." It took a moment for the full weight of it to sink in. David saw the understanding dawning on my face. "In other words," he concluded, leaning forward, the excitement clear in his voice, "if Marcus had succeeded, if you had signed those papers yesterday morning, or if he ever managed to legally force you out, he wouldn't get his resort. He wouldn't get his golden goose. The very second the deed changed hands, this clause would activate, and his only option would be to sell the entire property to Tanaka Holdings for the price Isabel had already set. He would have been a glorified delivery boy for a deal he knew nothing about. Isabel planted a legal time bomb right in the soil of this farm, Sam. And Marcus spent the last year trying to stomp on it with golf spikes." I stared at the document, at my wife's signature. She had seen it all coming. The greed, the manipulation, the final desperate move. She hadn't left me a shield. She had left me a sword. A very, very sharp one. A quiet sense of calm washed over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The path ahead was no longer dark and uncertain. It was illuminated by the brilliance of the woman I had loved for 40 years. I looked at David. The time for grieving was over. The time for anger was past. It was time for action. Then it's time to set it off, I said, my voice steady and clear. Arrange the meeting. We sat there in the quiet of the winery office as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the document from Tanaka Holdings lying on the desk between us, like a signed treaty at the end of a war that only one side knew had been fought. The anger from the night before had cooled and hardened into something far more useful resolve. David had spent the first hour on the phone, his voice a low, calm murmur, as he spoke to contacts, verifying the legal standing of the agreement, checking the county records. Everything was ironclad. Isabel had left no loopholes. Finally, David looked up from his notes, his face set. It's all in place, Sam. The agreement is active and legally binding. They can't touch the farm. All we have to do now is wait for him to make the next move. I shook my head. No, I said. We're not waiting. Isabel waited. I waited. We're done waiting. I looked at David and he saw the new hardness in my eyes. She left us a weapon. I want to use it. I want him to know who is in control now. David nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. What do you have in mind? Make the call, David, I said. Let Tanaka know that I'm aware of the agreement. Let him know that there has been an attempt by a third party to fraudulently gain control of the central asset in his project. Don't make threats. Just state the facts. Then we'll see how fast the dominoes fall. David picked up his phone. He didn't have to look up a number. He made a single quiet phone call not to Mr. Tanaka himself, but to the office of his chief legal counsel. His message was brief, professional, and devastatingly calm. I am calling on behalf of Samuel Vance, owner of Isabel's Vineyard, he said. We are calling to reaffirm our commitment to the partnership agreement filed on this date. We also wish to inform you that a hostile attempt to secure control of this asset has been made by a Mr. Marcus Thorne. Yes, Thorne. We simply wanted to ensure all partners were aware of the potential instability. Thank you for your time. David and I didn't know it at the time, but that single, simple phone call sent a ripple across the globe, a ripple that was about to become a tsunami, heading straight for a small, pristine island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Later, I would piece together what happened next. I can imagine Marcus in Bora Bora sitting on the deck of an overwater bungalow, the turquoise water so clear you could see the brightly colored fish swimming beneath his feet. I can picture the scene perfectly. He would be in the middle of his great apology tour, trying to repair the damage he had done. Clara would be sitting there hurt and confused, wanting to believe him. He would be pouring all of his charm into it, his voice soft and full of regret. It was the pressure, Clara, I can hear him saying, taking her hands in his. The wedding, the deals, the stress of it all. It was unforgivable, I know that. But it wasn't me. The man you married is the man who is here with you right now in paradise. He was likely blaming the champagne, his exhaustion, anything but the blackness in his own heart. He was probably just starting to win her back, just starting to rebuild the beautiful cage he had built for her. And then a small, insistent ping from his phone lying on the table beside a half-empty glass of orange juice. An interruption. He would have glanced at it, annoyed. His expression would have changed instantly. The manufactured warmth would have vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The first email David later found out was from the primary investment bank funding his grand resort project. The subject line was brutally direct: Urgent Project Helios, Finger Lakes, funding suspended. I can see his thumb swiping frantically to open it. The text would have been cold and corporate. His majority partner, the source of 90% of his capital, had unexpectedly pulled out, citing new information regarding the instability of key local assets. The project was frozen effective immediately. His dream was dead. He would have just been processing, that a knot of pure panic tightening in his chest when a second email arrived. Another ping. This one was from the board of Tanaka Holdings, a company to which he was deeply in debt for a different unrelated venture. The subject, summons to emergency board meeting. The email would inform him that his presence was required in their New York headquarters in 48 hours to discuss material breaches of fiduciary duty and financial exposure. The first email was a fire alarm. The second one told him the fire department wasn't coming. It was a pincer movement executed from 10,000 miles away. He was trapped. He would have looked up from his phone, his face pale, the tropical sun suddenly feeling cold on his skin. The paradise around him would have dissolved, replaced by the cold, hard reality of his own ruin. "What is it, Marcus?" Clara would have asked, seeing the look on his face. "What's wrong? We have to go," he would have stammered, already standing up, his mind racing. "We have to go back to New York. Now." The honeymoon was over. The frantic packing, the cancelled reservations, the hurried boat ride back to the mainland, the long silent flight back to reality. He had tried to escape the consequences of his actions in a tropical paradise, but Isabel's reach was longer than he could have ever imagined. Back in my quiet office, David and I poured another cup of coffee. We didn't know all the details then. All we knew was that the trap had been sprung. The first domino had fallen, and the wolf was running back to the den straight into our hands. The flight to New York was smooth. David and I didn't talk much. The plan was set, the pieces were in motion, and all that was left was the final quiet move on the chessboard. As the plane descended over the sprawling city, a landscape of steel and glass, so different from my own, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was a farmer, a man of the earth, heading into the heart of a world built on paper and promises. But I was the one who was grounded in the truth. The headquarters of Tanaka Holdings was on the 50th floor of a skyscraper that seemed to scrape the clouds. The elevator ride was silent and swift, and when the doors opened, we stepped into a world of quiet, understated power. There were no loud voices, no people rushing around. Just cool marble floors, dark wood walls, and a view of Manhattan that stretched out to the horizon. It was a place designed to make you feel small. But I didn't. I just felt far from home. We were shown into the boardroom. It was a long, minimalist room dominated by a single massive table of polished black granite. One entire wall was a sheet of glass looking down on the city below. At the head of the table, looking out the window, stood a man I hadn't seen in person in 20 years. Kenji Tanaka. He was older, his hair a distinguished silver, but he had the same quiet, powerful presence I remembered. He turned as we entered, and his stern face broke into a small, genuine smile. He walked over and shook my hand firmly. "Samuel," he said, his voice a low, respectful baritone. "It has been too long." "Kenji," I replied. "Thank you for seeing us." "The honor is mine," he said, his eyes glancing for a moment at the bruise on my cheek, which had faded to a pale yellow. His gaze was sharp, and in it I saw he understood everything without me having to say another word. He gestured for us to sit. We sat beside him at the head of the table, a united front. Tea was served in simple, elegant ceramic cups, and then we waited. We didn't have to wait long. About 15 minutes later, the door opened and Marcus walked in. Or rather, he stumbled in looking like a ghost. His expensive suit was wrinkled from the long flight, his tie was slightly askew, and his face was pale and slick with a thin sheen of sweat. The confident swagger he always wore was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate anxiety. He was a man running on fumes and fear. He was clearly expecting to see a group of his usual business contacts. He started to speak, a forced, cheerful greeting on his lips. "Sorry I'm late, gentlemen, the flight was—" His voice trailed off as his eyes adjusted to the room. He saw the imposing figure of Mr. Tanaka at the head of the table, and his fake smile faltered. He looked confused, intimidated. Then his eyes moved to the man sitting next to Mr. Tanaka. His gaze met mine. The shock that hit him was visible, a physical jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. All the color drained from his face. He stared at me sitting there in my simple tweed jacket, calmly sipping my tea as if I were an apparition. He couldn't compute it. He couldn't understand how the old farmer he had assaulted could possibly be sitting at the head of this table in this room, in the heart of his world. The sight of me in this place of power broke his reality. He opened and closed his mouth a few times like a fish out of water. Finally, he found his voice, a weak, stammering whisper. "Mr. Tanaka, Sam, what is this?" He looked from Mr. Tanaka's impassive face to my calm one, searching for an answer, for some kind of mistake. He looked like a trapped animal that had just realized the walls of the cage were closing in. Mr. Tanaka did not answer him. He did not even grant Marcus the dignity of a direct look. He simply took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea, his eyes fixed on the city skyline. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible gesture, he tilted his head slightly towards David Chen, who was sitting silently with his briefcase on the table in front of him. The gesture was clear. It was a dismissal. It said, "You are no longer important enough for me to speak to. You will deal with my lawyer." My lawyer. David Chen stood up. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, the calm center of the storm that was about to break. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it, but he didn't pull out a flurry of papers. He took out the items from Isabel's box one by one. First, he placed the small black leather ledger in the center of the polished granite table. It looked insignificant in the vast, powerful room. "Mr. Thorne," David began, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. "Let's start with the small things." He opened the ledger. "This is a record kept by the late Isabel Vance of undocumented personal loans made to you over the past 3 years. The final tally, which has never been repaid, is $75,000. I watched Marcus's face. He scoffed a small, nervous sound. He was trying to project confidence, waving a dismissive hand. That was a family matter, a misunderstanding of gifts. David didn't even acknowledge his protest. He simply moved on to the next item, the small, silver thumb drive. He plugged it into a port on the table, and the massive wall screen behind Mr. Tanaka flickered to life. It wasn't a presentation. It was a spreadsheet, a stark, brutal landscape of red numbers and negative balances. "And this," David said, his voice a little louder now, "is the reason for your urgency. These are your financials, a portfolio built on high-risk debt, and a string of catastrophic investment losses." He used a laser pointer to circle a number. "A margin call you are 3 days away from defaulting on. This is the evidence of your desperation, Mr. Thorne. The reason you so desperately needed an asset to leverage. A farm, for instance." Marcus stared at the screen, at the public display of his private failures. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. He started to stammer something about market volatility, but David was already moving on. He placed the tiny digital recorder on the table. And finally David said, "A matter of character." He pressed play. Suddenly the room was filled with Marcus's own voice, slick and condescending. "Isabel, please be reasonable. Think of it as unlocking the value of your assets. Sam is a great farmer, but he's too sentimental to see the big picture." Then I heard my wife's voice, a ghost in the machine, and my heart ached. It was weak, but it was pure steel. "Marcus, the big picture is the one you see from the front porch, not the one on a banker's spreadsheet. The farm is not an asset. It is our home. The answer is no." The recording clicked off, leaving an even deeper silence in its wake. Marcus shrank in his chair, his face a blotchy red. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't look at anyone. David let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before he spoke again. "All of this," he said, gesturing to the evidence, "is despicable. It shows a pattern of manipulation, deceit, and profound disrespect." His voice grew harder. "But this is illegal." The screen changed. Displayed in crisp, clear text was the official county-registered partnership agreement between Isabel Vance and Tanaka Holdings. My client's wife, Mrs. Isabel Vance, signed this binding agreement 5 years ago. Your every attempt to seize control of that farm, Mr. Thorne, constitutes a deliberate and fraudulent effort to interfere with a pre-existing economic contract. That is a crime. It was then that Mr. Tanaka finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it commanded the entire room. He turned his head slowly and looked at Marcus for the first time. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice low and steady, "do you know why Mrs. Vance came to me all those years ago?" Marcus, looking completely broken, could only shake his head. "It was because 20 years ago," Mr. Tanaka continued, his eyes now finding mine, "when my company was nothing more than an idea and a shoestring budget, I was on the verge of bankruptcy. The banks refused to give me a loan. They said I was too much of a risk." He paused, and his gaze returned to Marcus. "But one man did not. One man, a young farmer who barely knew me, saw something worth believing in. He co-signed my first business loan and secured it with a 10-acre section of his own farm. That man was Samuel Vance." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a truth so profound it needed no adornment. Marcus's jaw was slack. He finally understood he hadn't walked into a business meeting. He had walked into a reckoning. "Isabel did not come to me to set a business trap," Mr. Tanaka went on, his voice laced with a cold, righteous anger. "She came to me to protect a friend of her family. This agreement was not about profit. It was a vow between two people who understood the meaning of loyalty." He stood up then, a towering figure of quiet authority. "You tried to swindle the legacy of a woman I hold in the highest esteem," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every word landed like a hammer blow. "And you put your hands on a man I owe my entire career to." He looked at Marcus with a final, chilling emptiness. "Tanaka Holdings is acquiring all of your outstanding debt, effective immediately. Every asset you own is now frozen. Your employment contract with this organization and its subsidiaries is terminated. Our legal team will be in contact with you and the district attorney regarding the matter of attempted fraud." Marcus made a small choking sound. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just collapsed. He slumped back into the expensive leather chair, all the air, all the fight, all the arrogance gone from him, leaving behind a small, shrunken man. He finally understood. He hadn't just challenged an old farmer. He had angered a silent giant. The days that followed were quiet. The storm had broken, the lightning had struck, and now a strange, peaceful calm settled over the farm. David handled the legal fallout in the city, the methodical dismantling of Marcus's life. I didn't ask for details. It was enough to know it was done. I returned to my own world, to the familiar rhythms of the land. I spent my days in the West Field, where the youngest vines were just beginning to establish themselves. It was delicate work training the new shoots, clearing away any weeds that might choke their growth. It felt right. I wasn't just tending to the past. I was nurturing the future. About 2 weeks after the meeting in New York, I saw a car coming up the driveway. It wasn't David's sedan or a delivery truck. It was Clara's car. It moved slowly, hesitantly, as if the driver wasn't sure of her welcome. She parked near the house but didn't get out for a long time. When she finally did, my heart ached for her. She was thin, and the expensive, stylish clothes she wore seemed to hang off her, a costume from a life that no longer fit. She looked lost. She saw me working in the field and started walking towards me, her city shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. She stopped a few feet away, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Her eyes were full of a pain that I knew had nothing to do with money or status. It was the pain of a broken trust. "Dad," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. I stopped what I was doing and just looked at her, my daughter. That's all it took. Her face crumpled, and the tears she had been holding back finally came, silent at first, then in great shuddering sobs. She stumbled forward, and I met her halfway, wrapping my arms around her. She felt so small. She buried her face in my shoulder, and I just held her the way I had when she was a little girl who had scraped her knee. I was so blind, she finally managed to say, her voice muffled by my shirt. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have listened to you. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. The wounds were real and they would need time to heal. Instead, I just held her until the worst of the sobs had passed. Then I gently pulled back and wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. I took off my muddy work gloves and walked to the small tool shed at the edge of the field. I came back with a new clean pair. They were small, made for Isabel's hands, but they would fit Clara. I held them out to her. She looked at them confused. The soil always forgives, Clara, I said softly. It doesn't care about the mistakes you made last season. It doesn't remember the drought or the frost. It only cares about what you're willing to plant today. She took the gloves, her fingers tracing the clean leather. A small, watery glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. We start again, I said. Right here. Together. 6 months can feel like a lifetime or like a single long exhale after a storm. For us, it was both. Autumn arrived at the Finger Lakes, painting the hillsides in strokes of gold and crimson. The air grew crisp, and the vines hung heavy with deep purple grapes, the result of a season of hard work and healing. The farm was no longer silent. It was alive with a new kind of energy, a quiet hum of purpose. The first thing you saw when you turned up the driveway was the new sign. It was carved from a single piece of oak from a tree that had fallen a few winters back. The letters were simple and clear. The Isabel and Samuel Vance Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture in partnership with Tanaka Holdings. It was a statement, a declaration that this land was not just for us, but for the future. That future was walking among the vines. I often stood by the winery and just watched my daughter. Clara had found her footing not on the polished floors of a city high-rise, but in the rich, dark soil of her home. Today she was leading a group of agricultural students from the local college, explaining the delicate process of testing the sugar content of the grapes. She moved with a newfound confidence, her hands gesturing with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by worn jeans and sturdy boots. She was no longer wearing a costume. She was wearing her own skin. And she was beautiful. Later that afternoon, I had a visitor. Kenji Tanaka's black car was a familiar sight now, but he never came for a formal meeting. He came as a friend. We walked together, two old men, through the rows of vines, the setting sun casting long shadows behind us. We didn't talk about business or contracts. We talked about the weather, about the quality of the harvest, about the simple good things that make up a life. We stopped at the crest of the hill, at the spot overlooking the lake where Isabel and I had carved our initials so long ago. I had brought 2 glasses and a bottle of our newest vintage, the first one Clara had helped to oversee from start to finish. I poured the deep red liquid into the glasses, the aroma of dark cherries and oak rising to meet the cool autumn air. I handed a glass to Kenji. He held it up to the light, admiring the color. He swirled it once, then looked at me, his eyes full of a quiet, profound respect. He raised his glass. To Isabel, he said, his voice soft but clear. I raised my own glass to meet his, the crystal making a small, clean chime in the quiet of the vineyard. I looked past him to where I could see Clara laughing with her students. I saw the legacy not in the sign or the partnership, but in her. In the life that was being rebuilt, stronger and more true than before. To the things that last, I replied. We drank. The wine was good. It tasted of the sun and the soil and of promises kept. Order had been restored to my world, not by an act of revenge, but by an act of respect. It wasn't about tearing down what was wrong, but about building up what was right. And I knew as I stood there beside my friend, watching my daughter find her way home, that this was a foundation that would endure for generations to come. This story teaches that true strength lies not in loud aggression, but in quiet integrity. It's a powerful reminder that loyalty and a life's work are priceless treasures that greed can never conquer. Respect for the past built on principle is the only true foundation for a lasting legacy. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe is the most valuable legacy a person can leave behind?